Now, for the last 15 years, at least, Barcelona have been one of Europe's great football teams, great football clubs indeed. Magnificent stadium, magnificent people, great players. The greatest of them all, of course, Lionel Messi, winners of the Champions League under Pep Guardiola and Frank Rijkaard. And, of course, so many memorable games, so many memorable players. It isn't just Lionel Messi, Sanchez, Xavi, Iniesta, great players. And now this great club is in crisis, and in quite a big way. And we're joined now from Barcelona by Richard Fitzpatrick, an Irishman who works as a journalist from Barcelona. Richard, this is a remarkable story, many twists and turns, and a lot of it focusing on the man many of us believe is the greatest player ever to play the game, Lionel Messi. Where has it all gone wrong?
Yeah, how long do you have? You're definitely correct in teeing it up around Messi. It completely revolves around this guy. You touched on his illustrious time at the club. Those last 15 years, he's been part of the first team. It's notable that most of those successes are in Europe anyway. Certainly came in the first half of his career. Those 4 Champions League titles with Rijkaard and Pep Guardiola, and lastly with Luis Enrique in 2015. So the problem for Barca's fans is that he's at the peak of his career. He's still extraordinary, even though he turned 33 a few days ago. But he hasn't won a Champions League trophy in 5 years now at this stage, and the wheels are coming off again this season. However, he has papered over the cracks. They've won 8 of the last 11 league titles, so that's kept the hordes from the gates.
Yes.
Until this season. Now they're going to cede the league title, it seems inevitably, to Real Madrid this year. There's 5 games left. Real Madrid are 4 points ahead with a better head-to-head advantage. So that seems a done deal. And there's absolute chaos at an institutional level in the club. And we've talked about it a few times over the last 6 months. The Hankies were out at the Camp Nou when there were fans allowed to go to the stadium. The first time in over a decade this has happened, calling for the president's head. He's had scandal after scandal. He can't do anything right. Even during the lockdown, when you would think nothing was happening, he had a big row with Messi and the squad players over their salary reduction. There was a problem about whose decision it was going to be. The players under Messi's leadership eventually came out and blew the board away, complaining that they were always going to take the salary cut, but that they were being made to look tight by the board. And then they trumped the board by saying they were going to cover the staff's salary in the club, as well as taking a pay cut themselves. That element of the story has another chapter to come, because the players will have to take a further salary cut next season to cover the lost revenue that the club is suffering. It has already this season, because of the coronavirus, lost over 150 million in revenue, and it's a good case scenario is that they lose a further 200 million next season off their budget. So there's a lot of financial problems at play in the club.
I just saw a news flash on the Daily Mail online suggesting that Lionel Messi might leave the club when his contract expires next season. This is what the newsflash said. My understanding is in his contract he has a clause that allows him to leave whenever he wants.
Yeah, that's correct. The contract itself, it does run until 2021, but he has this option to step out now at the end of the season if he wanted to. It's not an unusual club clause to have. A lot of top players previously at the club have had it, like Iniesta and Carlos Puyol. At the moment, this is another headache at the club. The club are trying to renegotiate Messi's contract to add on another 2 years onto this contract to bring him up to 2023. Messi isn't making life easy for them over that issue. But the problems now have surfaced on the pitch as well. They've ceded the league title effectively to Real Madrid. The coach, Quique Setien, is absolutely lost at sea. We would have spoken when he was appointed back in January that he was a guy who didn't have a top-class CV. He'd never managed in the Champions League before, which seemed remarkable, taking over a club like Barcelona. But the problem was he was a good technical coach, but he just didn't have the personality, and he came in as fourth or fifth choice as coach. So immediately he was on the back foot, and he's been shown up now. The Luis Suarez, after the game on Sunday, openly came out and criticised him, saying that their away form this season had been really poor because of the coaching staff. And on Tuesday night they played Atletico. They lost, or they drew 2-2 with them in a critical game. And Antoine Griezmann was substituted, as he has been for 3 of the last 4 games. He only came on in the 90th minute. Even a 17-year-old Ansu Fati was put on before him. This was deeply embarrassing for Griezmann, who was bought for 120 million last summer. And afterwards, Griezmann's father sent out a message on social media saying, this guy, Quique Setien, who is he? He's not even driving this truck. He's only a passenger, implying that Messi is the guy who's managing the team now. So there's all kinds of issues within the squad as well as with the boardroom.
And one of the big questions for the last 18 months has been whether or not Neymar will come back to Barcelona from PSG. And this is something apparently that Messi and Suarez both desire. Of course, the 3 of them did for a while form a very brilliant partnership. But Neymar is a desperate playboy, and the money that Barca don't have anymore, will that have an effect on their ability to go into the transfer market, Richard?
Yeah, you raise a very interesting point. Neymar is a big part of this problem. You're correct to flag both Suarez and Messi and other senior players in the squad, including Piqué, wanted Neymar back. He did function very well. It was perhaps the most famous trident, definitely in modern times. The 3 of them were electric for 2 or 3 seasons. And Neymar's success, it would be hugely debatable whether he would function again if he came back to Barcelona, because he's 28 now and he seems out of control. His lifestyle and other issues, he's suffered a lot from injuries in the last couple of seasons. But he was very effective with Messi and Suarez. And the problem is that Griezmann isn't effective, or not at the level that Neymar is. So this is showing up, again, the problems with the planning of the squad. So whether Neymar would work again or not is a big question mark.
I thought a bad sign, Richard, of their present state was that they just signed Pjanic from Juventus. He's okay, but you wouldn't have thought he's a playmaker, a midfield playmaker, but I wouldn't have thought he was the kind of player that could help to turn around a club as big as Barcelona.
Yeah, that's been a huge sticking point here over the last week. It comes down to business. It was effectively a 3-card trick that you'd see on the street outside of Flackhole or something. It was an accountancy maneuver by the club. And basically, they traded Panic for Arthur, a Brazilian. They managed to get on the books. The Arthur transfer is worth 82 million, because that Panic comes for like 70 million all told, spread over 4 or 5 seasons. They only have to pay 15 million or so the first season. It means that they can log a profit of 50 million on that trade. It was all about business, and because their finances are in such disarray. This guy Panic has come in. He's in his 30s already. The big problem with this Barca squad is its age profile. The team that drew during the week against Atletico, Vidal, Rakitic, Piqué, Suarez, Messi, Alba, Busquets, they're all well into their 30s now. And now you're adding another 30-year-old, Artur. For all his problems adapting, was still only 23. He may or may not have made it, but at least he had a long career ahead of him. So also his style of play. Artur was brought into the club as the new Xavi. Messi was praising him at the start of his time at the club, but he was part of this tiki-taka kind of DNA. But Panic isn't that style of player. So we'll see.
One of the things that is of interest is the great former players who have done well. Well, Ronald Koeman is one of them, who turned the job down. I understand. Maybe you can correct me on that. Xavi himself, a great player, who went off, I think, somewhere in the Arab world to coach, or maybe China. But I think Iniesta went to China as well. But you can colour that picture in for me, Richard. But certainly Ronald Koeman, I think, did turn the job down. He is a former Barcelona player and a great player, and has done well in management. He's now managing the Netherlands national team. They're lining people up, but will they be willing to come?
Yeah, you're correct. They've gone to Koeman's door twice, and he said no twice, because he wants to hold on until after the European Championships, which have obviously been delayed till next season now, until the summer of 2021. Xavi is the name on everybody's lips. They went to Xavi back in January when they sacked Ernesto Valverde and brought in Quique Setién. He would be the great messiah, whether he's unproven effectively in management. He's managing, as I say, out in the desert in Al Said in Qatar. But in Europe's top leagues, he's unproven. But the players themselves are desperate to bring him in. When they were sacking Valverde at the time, Messi spoke to Xavi on the phone and asked him would he come back. That was an indication of how much they'd like him on board. The question is whether Xavi will come back now. He's said many times he wants to manage at Barcelona, but he's not aligned with the current board. This current board is really toxic. They've tried to get Carlos Puyol back in as sporting director as well. He said no. He resigned back in 2014 in solidarity with Anthony Zubizarreta, who was sacked as a sporting director at that time, and he was working as his right-hand man. But all that great Barca team of 2009 2011, none of them like this board. So Xavi has aligned himself with the opposition candidate for the upcoming presidential elections, a guy called Victor Font. But he may weigh up the situation. You know, these trains don't come along all the time, and Victor Font might win that election. So maybe he comes back in the summer. That's a great unknown. But
just on the point of the board, Richard, there is what's called Barcagate, the scandal of that. Can you remind us what the president of the club was found to be doing on social media? Indeed, having engaged a marketing company or some such thing to attack Lionel Messi and his own players.
Yeah, it's an extraordinary scandal. It went back to around February time. It blew up. Cadena Ser, one of the radio stations here in Catalonia, broke the story. This social media company was hired by the club to monitor social media activity, and effectively they carried out smear campaigns against enemies, so-called enemies of the president. These included former players and former greats like Pep Guardiola, even Messi's wife, and Gerard Piqué. So it was hugely embarrassing. That would have been bad enough, but then there was all this murky stuff around the financing of the operation. The payments for this company, which were in a kind of tax-free zone in Uruguay, that people were asking, why are we employing a company out in South America when you'd have this expertise in Catalonia? The payments were made; they were overpriced. It was up to $1 million was paid for the service. The payments were made in lodgements of 198,000. If a payment goes over 200,000, it has to get approval from the board. This immediately raised eyebrows. The president's right-hand man, the guy who was anointed as his successor candidate, who was going to be the continuity president in the next election campaign, he resigned in April along with 5 other board directors, and he claimed in a radio interview back around April, the time he resigned, that there was fingers in the till, and implying there was an embezzlement going on. So PwC the management consultancy were hired to investigate the issue or do an audit on it back when it blew up around February. That was stalled because of the coronavirus. They eventually delivered their report a couple of weeks ago. So the club is sitting on that at the moment. They haven't released the details of it. So we'll have to see what happens there.
Now, as for Messi and what he might do, apparently he was the first person off the pitch after the disappointing home draw against Atletico the other night. He's 33. He has been so great. He has been in Barca since I think he was 14. What does the future hold for this great player?
Well, we touched on his contract. This has to be renewed now. He has this clause that he can leave the club. The Daily Mail perhaps are sending out news flashes that he might leave at the end of the season. In the 15 years he's been on the first team, it has never been as bad institutionally as it is now.
Yes.
The $64,000 question is, would he leave? I think that's hugely unlikely, however chaotic the situation is.
$64,000 a minute.
yeah.
Question.
So, he's on a neat salary of 106 million a year, the noise.
And he's worth it.
Yeah. It's unlikely he will walk away unless it's got really, really bad. He's, few clubs could afford to buy him. He's, like you say, he's been living here for 20 years now. He's more Catalan than he's Argentinian, arguably, at this stage. His kids are at school. He's discounted the possibility of returning to his boyhood club, Newell's in Rosario, because he says it would be too disruptive for his kids. His best mate lives next door, Luis Suarez, although interestingly, Barca have a problem with him because his contract expires next year. He's looking for renewal, but he's 33. He's after several knee injuries, so he isn't the future of the club. Messi is in this difficult situation now. He's the de facto president of the club. The president operates under the policy of keep Messi happy, everything will be okay. He's failed even in that. He can't keep the guy happy. He's hardly talking to the president, and he's at war with the sporting director Eric Abidal. The coach now is out for lunch. He's a dead man walking. He'll be replaced in the summer. Messi has stepped into that vacuum, and very reluctantly, it's not his personality to be a kind of leader like that, and he just doesn't have the skills. So he can be sulky, and that doesn't help. So it's a big problem, and also it's getting to the stage now that the team absolutely defers to him, and that they're wilting now in his presence. If Messi doesn't score the goals, the team is in trouble.
And of course, it makes it very hard, Richard, for somebody like Griezmann to come in, to find a position in the team that is compatible with Messi. And that's, I suppose, why Neymar and Messi and Suarez got on so well. Neymar was able to find an accommodation, if you like, a synergy with the other two. Griezmann clearly wasn't, but there have been other top players who went to Barca and they weren't able to fit in to the team. And I mean, Messi occupies a lot of space, not just his personality, but his game.
Hugely so. That's both socially and on the pitch. Griezmann has suffered. He's a number 10. He plays in the same position as Messi. Like lesser players, like say Pedro in his day was very effective at Barca in that front three with Messi and David Villa, because his style of play, he hugged the touchline. Griezmann isn't an out and out wide player. He can't dribble. He doesn't have the that Iniesta had, for example, who often played in that advanced role up front as well. He could play in tight spaces. He was an amazing dribbler. So Griezmann has suffered from that respect. Neymar also had a great friendship with, or still has a great friendship with Messi and Suarez, so that has helped him as well. He left the club though because he wanted to be the boss, and that's why he went to Paris Saint-Germain. So, I mean, that's another problem as well that would surface if he returned, but he won't be returning this year anyway.
Okay, so Barca in big trouble, Richard, both on and off the pitch, and financially now, they won't be punching their weight big time in the transfer market, will they?
No, and in the short term they won't. And if I was a Barca fan, I would be more troubled about the long-term picture. This summer, they might still go for Lautaro Martinez, Inter Milan striker. They could get him they can get a player in there as a part exchange. His salary would be quite low, and they would spread that transfer fee over 5 seasons, so it wouldn't be a big hit on their budget. They've like we've spoken about before, that took out a loan last season to get the Griezmann transfer over the finish line, and this president has 1 year left to run in his mandate, so he can afford to push things down the road. That's why they were scrambling this at the end of their financial year, June 30th, to get that Artur transfer done, and so he could leave that mess for his successor. But the worry for Barca fans is the long-term outlook. Messi's inevitably going to retire in a couple of years. They might squeeze another 2 or 3 years out of him, but they have to replace that whole team. We just spoke about the 7 players that are over 30 on that starting 11. Real Madrid across the country have built up a war chest. They haven't spent heavily over the last 5 years. They've spent about half of what Barca has on the transfer market in that time. Their policy this summer is to sell players, not to buy players. They just sold Akraf, who's an academy player, for 45 million. They've always, or it's certainly in the last 10 years, they've sold a lot better than Barca. Barca could never sell an academy player at that kind of fee, or they haven't in the last 10 years. So they've also been managing their money well. They closed the Bernabeu Stadium during the the lockdown and during the crisis, so they can accelerate the building work on that stadium. They've played their games behind closed doors. Obviously, fans aren't allowed in the stadiums. At their training pitch, it hasn't mattered. They've won 6 out of 6 games since the return of play. So they're going to open this new stadium in a couple of years' time. They're going to wait for it. They'll make a big jump in 12 months' time for Mbappe, whoever the other big stars are in football at the time over the next couple of years. Whereas Barca, their stadium rebuild, they have a big 700-800 million project, which is on ice at the moment. They're debating whether to go ahead with that. Their finances are in disarray. The debt is probably about 800 million. So they're going to be in trouble. There's troubles ahead for them,
Okay, Richard, thank you very much for talking to us from Barcelona, bringing us what is really a sad story. It's the end of a chapter, a glorious chapter in European soccer history. Richard Fitzpatrick, thank you very much.